Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. It is 3 p.m. here in the UK and it's 10 a.m. Eastern time. And you're all most welcome to join us here at 0 Days Live. Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday, which, as regulars of the show will know, is Tech Tuesday today. And I'm hopeful that there are going to be less tech issues than yesterday. So thank you, as my quick shout out to Super Steve, as he is now known, for stepping into the breach and ensuring there were no dull moments before I was able to join yesterday. In a few moments, we're going to be joined in the studio once again by Gary Hibbard, who's director at Cyberfort, and we're going to cover off some questions that we should be asking to achieve GDPR and ISO 27001. But before that, quick reminder that yesterday, of course, we spoke to Mark Oakton from InfoSec Partners to talk to us about the increasing importance of securing digital learning platforms that are clearly being used in prevalence right now, and understanding the hints and tips that he would suggest for both education providers and students alike in order to maintain their security online. Also a heads up, other subjects this week include tomorrow, where we'll be welcoming a special guest to the studio as part of our Security Begins Here edition. And on Thursday, we see Alex Crompton, Head of Security Consulting at BAE Systems. And he'll be joining us to talk about managing security through sustained emergency situations, such as the ones we're finding ourselves in right now with COVID-19. Hello, everybody. Hope you're well. I'm Stuart Reed and I'm with Nominet, focused on cyber solutions. And as usual, I'm in the chair to welcome our special guests each and every day of our live shows. Just a quick reminder that Nominet is primarily known for being responsible for managing the .uk domain, which we've been doing for over 23 years now and have something in the order of 15 million domains under management. And building on this strong heritage of understanding the importance of domain names for network connectivity, we also provide cybersecurity solutions to protect both government and enterprise networks worldwide from cyber attacks, including providing service to the UK government's National Cybersecurity Centre. And ensuring people are able to be connected, included and secure is at the heart of what we do here at Nominet. And that is perhaps more important now than it ever has been before. With that in mind, we wanted to bring you an interactive show to bridge the gap that's been perhaps left behind by the lack of physical meetings that are not taking place right now, and therefore bring you 0 Days Live. And this is really an opportunity for anyone with an interest in or from within cybersecurity to get involved. Now, I'm joined front of house and behind the scenes here with a highly capable team, making sure everything runs just the way it should, albeit remotely. And speaking of remotely, as that's what we're all doing right now, this week's burning question is, what's your worst isolation purchase? So please do let us know. Now, today for me, probably my worst purchase was actually booking a holiday that was due to take place right now. Now, I'm sure I'm not alone, and everyone that's tuning in can relate to that in one way or another, but at least the weather is pleasant outside for us right now. And speaking of pleasant, you heard his dulcet tones yesterday. It's Steve. How are you today, Steve?
I'm good, thanks, Stuart. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you, Steve. The sun is actually shining here today. It makes a big difference. So how about with you?
Yeah, the sun is shining here. It looks very nice outside. I'm looking forward to doing my daily exercise this evening.
Excellent, good stuff. And speaking of daily exercise within isolation, today's or this week's burning question, of course, is what is your worst isolation purchase? What have you got for us, Steve?
So today I'm going to go for, it wasn't strictly a purchase because I kind of borrowed it from my mum just before we went into lockdown, but it is a bread machine. At that particular time, we were struggling to get bread in the local shop, so I thought, well, we'll get a bread machine, we'll make our own, and I did make one loaf, and then I quickly found out that you couldn't buy flour either, so that went out the window, and it's been sat in the cupboard ever since.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of people can relate to that. There's been a lot of home baking that people have had best intentions of doing, but yeah, there's certainly also around my way a bit of a lack of flour. Plenty of toilet roll now, though. So
absolutely,
every cloud.
You can't make bread out of that, though.
Well, there's probably some recipes online. Anyway, this show, thank you for that, by the way, Steve. This show, of course, isn't the same without all of you joining us at home as well. And we're delighted to welcome regulars and new audience members every single day as we build an accessible community to bring people together hear from others in the industry, get a round of what's going on in the news, share some thoughts on best practice, and of course, interject a bit of good humor along the way. Now, with that in mind, we do cover a lot of important subjects, but we do make sure that we don't take ourselves too seriously here at 0 Days Live. And as a quick reminder, each of our 30-minute or so shows is absolutely live each and every day. And for those of you who joined yesterday, you will know that they absolutely are live because you certainly couldn't script the catalogue of network challenges that I had as part of our live show. There will be some other mild blips, I'm sure, along the way. And when they do happen, hope you agree, it's just part of the reason that you tune in to come and see us every single day. And please do get involved if during today's show or any of the other live shows you want to ask a question, give comment, please do so using the console on your screen, and Kerry will read them out during the webcast. And speaking of Kerry, how are you today, Kerry?
Hi Stuart, I'm good, thank you. It might be my turn for the network issues today.
Good stuff. I'm passing that baton along and sort of sharing the love. That's what this show's all about. So we'll soldier on regardless. So tell us, Kerry, what is your worst isolation purchase?
Well, I think I actually took inspiration from you yesterday with your running pouch thing. I bought myself a Fitbit type watch to go when we came into lockdown because I knew I wasn't doing enough exercise, unlike you and Steve. And I wanted to kind of motivate myself knowing my daily step count. But all it's done really is track what my awful daily step count is and leave me thoroughly depressed with my glass of wine.
Well, you know, again, as I said, Steve, every cloud on all that, at least you know, and also you know that you are certainly not breaking any social distancing rules with those steps. So probably a congratulations or well done needed for you. Now, everybody tuning in, please also let us know what your worst isolation purchase is. And we will read them out during the course of the show. Also, any questions that you have from our special guests, or indeed to us on the panel, do also type those into the console on your screen. Now, as I mentioned a few moments ago, today we are welcoming back to our virtual studios Gary Hibbard, Director at Cyberfort. So without further ado, welcome back to the studios, Gary. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I notice that you've still got your exercise chart in the background there, so it looks like things are going well.
They are indeed. I'm ticking everything off every single day. You know, the miles done, the circuits done, and various other things. I have to say that my writing is getting smaller and smaller because I didn't quite anticipate we would be in lockdown quite this long. So I'm going to be laid on the floor, sort of writing the last sections of this, I think.
So that is obviously something that's gone well in isolation for you. Tell us, what's your worst isolation purchase?
Well, I had a great idea the other week, that once we are out of lockdown and I'm doing these sorts of presentations on stage, that I would have an idea to showcase a communication tool that I've created or that I found that is 100% safe and secure in our digitalized world, and that I would walk over and I would unveil this item. I thought that would be really cool. And that item, spoiler alert, was just a typewriter, because I thought that would be quite cool, quite fun. So I have to admit that I'd had a glass of wine or two. So I purchased what I thought was a full-size typewriter, which would be a child's sort of replica thing. It's not quite what I expected. So yeah, I think, you know, the lessons there are not to mix shopping with glasses of wine, I think
there's a top tip there, but I do have to say that that's quite an elegant piece of kit there. So if nothing else, you can put it on the shelf to look nice.
Well, yeah, it's an ornament now. Yeah, I think
exactly,
so.
Exactly. It's the right size for an ornament for sure. So thank you for sharing that with us, Gary. Now, of course, top of the show did say that we wanted to talk to you a bit more about some of the themes that you touched on last time you were here. And understand a bit more around GDPR, what that's about, and also ISO 27001, because both of those are pretty significant for organizations of any size to really give some thought towards. So perhaps we could start with you giving us a bit of an overview of the basic premise and principles of both GDPR and ISO 27001.
Okay. I mean, first thing to say really is that they are two very different things. They are meant to serve two masters, if you like. GDPR is the law. I mean, that's as simple as I can put it, first and foremost. Within it, there are a number of principles that organizations have to adhere to, just like the good old Protection Act of old. And those principles include things such as acting lawfully, fairly, and transparently with data. It requires you, so GDPR requires you to ensure that data is accurate and that you have a purpose limitation, so you're only going to use it for set reasons. It's what's known as an outcome-focused regulation, really. So it sets out key principles. So it says things such as you shall maintain information security to ensure the protection of data subjects, so you and I. It's the law. So there's no getting away from GDPR. Every organization within the EU and anyone processing data of EU citizens has to comply with the law. ISO 27001, however, is a security standard. It's just like ISO 9001, which is a quality standard. I often say that ISO 27001 is a quality standard that is very much focused on information security. And it's a standard that organizations don't have to adhere to. They can choose to sign up to it. I think it's a very good standard. I think more and more organizations are requiring companies to have that in place. And I think we're going to start to see more and more people asking about things like ISO standards, ISO 27001, ISO 22301 from a business continuity point of view as time progresses. So one is mandatory, it's the law, and the other is just a really good idea and something that I think more and more people should be undertaking. That principally is the difference.
Okay, so thank you for clearing that for us. I guess digging into that a little bit deeper, what sits behind these legislations, or in terms of the real aim of them, and what does that mean for business? You say one of them is legal and one of them is kind of best practice, but in terms of how that gets applied to a business, what should they be thinking about?
Okay, so to answer the first question, I guess, what's principally behind it? Certainly from a legal point of view, GDPR, it's about making sure that organizations and individuals can be held accountable for the protection of data and in particular personal data when we're talking about GDPR. So what's behind it is a recognition by the government, and again, it's a very broad statement, but it's a recognition that organizations have for many, many years collected and held data about us individually and collectively, and are using that data for their own ends to monetize you or I. The whole purpose of GDPR is to simply say organizations have to take care with that data, and they have to make sure that organizations are processing data in a responsible way. I often say to people that GDPR simply means giving data proper respect. That's what all it actually stands for. It doesn't. It stands for General Data Protection Regulation, of course, but it's the law. And in terms of what organizations should be thinking about is that ISO 27001 is a standard which looks broader than technology. So it requires organizations not just to think about data in terms of cyber or digital. What it asks people to do is to think about the way data is used within their organization, who they share it with, so their providers and suppliers and such like, but also how are people being brought into the organization, what training do they receive, etc., around data protection and the security of information. In a nutshell, I say both are opposite sides of the same coin. The way I look at it is that ISO 27001 is very much security. It's about what you should do, and the GDPR is more around privacy, and it's how you should do something with data and who you're sharing it with. So privacy is about the who, it's about the personal side of things, whereas the 27001 is more around security, how you're going to secure data and what you're going to do with that security.
Okay.
Does that
Thank you. Yeah, it does. It's really helpful because we hear a lot about both of these standards, and I think the terms get bandied around quite a lot, and people become a little bit nervous about actually asking some of the fundamental questions about what the principles are of them and how they can be applied to their business. So this is absolutely the kind of level of information that a lot of people probably don't have right now. So we'll find this really interesting. Certainly from my side, it gives a good insight for us.
I think, yeah, and again, just to reiterate, remembering that only one of these is a standard, the other is the law. So every organisation, across the land, will process personal data. I've had people say, but we only deal with business to business, for instance. But you employ people. If you employ people, then the chances are you've got people's personal details, such as bank account details, because presumably you pay these people. So GDPR is the law, and it's requiring people to take responsibility. There is what's known as the 7th principle of accountability under GDPR, which talks about the fact that the controller, that is the organisation or individual who collects data, the reasons for collecting data, that they have put in place appropriate technical and organisational measures to protect the rights and freedoms of people like you or I. ISO 27001 is a standard which organisations should be looking at because it goes end to end within the organisation. It doesn't just focus on technology. It takes you through policies all the way through to compliance to make sure that people are, again, acting responsibly with people's data. And it's unlike GDPR, ISO 27001, you can have a certificate on your wall. It's evidence-based. It's organisations can become certified to the standard and have a nice certificate and a nice little logo that they can put on their website, which proves that they have attained a certain level of security. GDPR, however, doesn't have that. There's no such thing as being 100% GDPR compliant, because it's an outcome-focused regulation. So it tells you what it expects you to do, and then you need to put in place steps and measures that you think are appropriate. And what it means to someone like Nominet will be completely different to an organisation that employs 5 people compared to an organisation that employs 50 people, 100 people, 200 people.
No, I think that's a good point, though, actually, you raised there, Gary, because it's certainly worth making that distinction. So I appreciate you underlining that for us again, that one's around legal obligation and one's around essentially best practice. But both of those being recognised in the industry is something that either you have to do or you should be making best endeavours to do. A lot of organisations that are tuning in today will be going, right, how do I do that then? What are your practical tips to make it easier for an organisation to either show the compliance against the law or show best endeavours against the standard?
Okay, so in order to show best endeavours against the law, the best you can ever do is build what's called a defendable position. So if you get into hot water for whatever reason, what you want to be able to demonstrate is that you did, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, which polices, which is the central government, which polices GDPR, will really only want to know 3 things. And that is that they'll want to know, what did you do to prevent this breach from happening? What did you do to prevent this cyber attack? Once it happened, what did you do and how did you respond to it? So what's your emergency response plan? What's your business continuity process? Did you inform the ICO? Did you inform the data subjects in a timely fashion? That type of thing. And then thirdly, what are you going to do to prevent this from ever happening again? So they're the three, very loosely, the kind of things that the ICO would want to know. Now, ISO 27001, when we're talking about the principles under GDPR, if you remember, I said to you that one of the principles is around it's what's known as integrity and confidentiality. So it talks about personal data shall be processed in a manner that will ensure its appropriate use, etc., and that it's appropriately secured. If you have ISO 27001 in place, you can look at that certificate, you can point to it to say, look, we have done lots of things, and in ISO 27001 there are 114 controls that you have to consider and decide whether they are applicable to your organization or not, and then you put in those particular controls. But you can point to that and say, look, ICO, we did have a breach, but look, we've got ISO 27001. We have definitely been doing all we can to prevent this from happening. And indeed, within ISO 27001, there are a set of controls within it that talks about having business continuity plans. So those business continuity plans and also incident management plans would actually then give you further evidence to answer that second question, which is, when it happened, what did you do? And within those plans, you will have a process to say, this is what we would do in the event of a breach, this is what we would do, who we would inform, and we would have practiced it, etc., etc. And then third question that the ICO asked, as I said, is, how are you going to learn from this? Is you would, as part of ISO 27001, you have a risk register. So you would say, well, we've identified some of the weaknesses, we've recognized that that's a risk. This is all about continual improvement, and therefore we will look to improve things further on down the line. So ISO 27001, I think, is the foundation that will actually then allow you to be able to demonstrate some level of capability to respond to the requirements of GDPR.
Great, thank you very much.
In practical terms, what should organizations be doing? I think the first thing I would suggest that anyone does is genuinely get a hold of ISO 27001, get a hold of the standard, because I've already mentioned that within a part of the standard itself, it's known as the Annex A controls. And Annex A, as I said, has 114 controls within it. And you can quite literally, and we've seen this many, many times and done it different ways, you can literally take those 114 controls and perform a gap analysis on your own organization. Where are we now? Do we have security policies in place? Have we communicated our policies across the business? What training do we provide? How often do we provide that training? And those sorts of questions you can ask yourself as an organization. Performing that gap analysis will then put you in a position of knowledge, and you'll be able to then make a reasoned decision on what your next steps are, where your biggest gaps actually are.
Excellent. Well, you preempted my next question there around actually what you should be doing to map against the standards there. So you've answered that one for me, but I do notice that somebody's waiting very patiently on the screen here. It is, of course, Steve, yes. which can only mean one thing. He's got a question to ask.
Yeah, so hi, Gary. My question was around kind of making sure that you're truly compliant. So I guess this is less necessary for ISO 27001 because you have to demonstrate compliance to get your certification. You have to ensure you're demonstrating how you really are kind of truly compliant. But for GDPR, there is no magic certification for this. So what questions do you think you should be asking your business and employees to ensure that you are truly compliant with the regulation regarding GDPR?
Okay, I mean they are very similar. The approach again is very, very similar. I'm a practical guy and I like to give practical tools. I would again suggest get a hold of a copy of the GDPR. I'm not quite sure what page it's on, but Article 5 is where you will find the 6 principles, the 7th principle being the principle of accountability. And because it's an outcome-focused regulation, again, I would simply say to any organization out there, make a list of what those 6 principles are and ask yourself, what are we doing to make sure, what body of evidence could we provide that demonstrates we are doing these things? So for instance, data, I think it's the third principle, which talks about data minimization. So that simply means that organizations shouldn't be holding documents for longer than is absolutely necessary. Now, it's down to you to determine what necessary means and for how long you should be holding those documents. So you can, what you should be looking at that and asking your organization, so asking HR, asking finance, asking operations, maybe the marketing team, and saying, okay, guys, what's the least amount of data that we hold? Are we comfortable that we're holding only the necessary data that we absolutely need? And how long are we retaining it? What is our deletion process look like? So these, it's about asking the right kinds of questions, but you can very simply use something like GDPR as a gap analysis tool, and then, as I said, using 27001 in a similar manner. But that's the process I would go. I think taking it back one step, if anyone was leaving this meeting right now and saying, right, okay, we need to get on top of this, first thing I would suggest is that you create a security committee or a security forum, and that forum would be made up of the heads of or the people responsible for things like finance, your facilities, your technology, your operations, HR, sales and marketing, and get those people to answer these kinds of questions. That's the approach I would take.
Thanks, Gary. And we're also increasingly being told that we should scrutinise the security of our supply chain. So what sort of questions should we be asking of our suppliers and our partners to ensure that they're also following those best practices and are compliant as well as our own organisations?
Okay. Again, it's very simple steps. Question one is, are you ISO 27001 certified? So if they are, then ask them for a copy of that certificate, and then suddenly you can rest assured that the organisation is doing is aligned to best practice. But also ask them what other security standards that they hold. So there are others that they can attain. At the bottom end, you've got Cyber Essentials, all the way up to you can have PCI DSS. There are other variety of ISO standards like ISO 22301, which is the business continuity one, which I've already mentioned. If it's a cloud provider, they may come back and say, look, we've got certificates on ISO 27017 and 27018, and this is around cloud security. So there's lots of other different certificates and badges that they could be holding. Your review of suppliers should be based on risk. So again, for some practical tips, I would always suggest, have a supplier register, and that can be as simple as going to your finance team and saying, who have we paid in the last 12 months, and then from there you can make a risk-based assessment on who are your critical suppliers, and at that point you can ask them these questions about, are you ISO 27001? Do you have PCI DSS if you are taking credit card payments, etc.? Are you SOC 1 and SOC 2 if you're in America? Are you HIPAA compliant? So all of these kinds of things. But asking them those kinds of questions alongside, GDPR. So can you give me some a feeling for how what you're doing to comply with the regulation GDPR? And then finally, I think in this current environment that we're in, I think more and more people are going to be asking the question of how are you prepared for further pandemic disruption? I think they're the kind of key questions that we're going to be starting to ask our suppliers. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely, thank you.
Great, well, thank you very much for the insight there. I imagine that we've got some questions coming in from our audience on this one as well. Kerry, what have we got?
Yeah, we've got quite a few, but I think the majority of them covered off already, but there's still a couple. What are the most common mistakes for companies approaching ISO 27001? And that's from Justin.
I think that there's two ends of the scale. One is making it far more complex than it needs to be. I think that's because it is a fairly big security standard. As I've said, there's what's known as Annex A controls. There's 114 controls. I think making the scope so big and trying to almost boil the ocean, you're trying to do too much. I think if you take it in bite-sized chunks, you start with the standard itself. The actual main part of the standard starts with something called context, and understanding the context of your organization, understanding your marketplace, understanding who are the key partners, the key third parties that are going to be involved. And then moving through to the next section is leadership. I think that's, making sure that you have good, clear leadership in place. But I guess more fundamentally than anything else, and it's one question I always ask when anyone says to me, I want to do ISO 27001, is understand why. Why do you want to do it? What is it that it's going to gain you? What is it going to give you? So understanding your why, I think, will then help you be able to put in place this standard itself. And the final tip and the final thing that people get wrong is that they think ISO 27001 is a technology standard. And again, I've said it several times. It's not. It's about information governance. It's about what you're doing with data and how you are protecting it.
Brilliant, that's really helpful, thank you. And then just one from Harrison. He's asking around GDPR and the number of fines that when GDPR was launched, there was obviously lots of scaremongering about big fines. Has that actually come through now? It's become more of an everyday standard. Are we starting to see that settle down?
No, it's the fines are small by any consideration, really, any stretch of the imagination. They are small. They will increase, I think, over the years, but we're not seeing it come through that the big scary numbers that everybody reported. And I never thought that would be the case. I truly think that a lot of scaremongering was done by people who didn't really understand the true nature of what the ICO were trying to do with GDPR. The big fines, the big numbers and such were really put in place as a punitive charge for those larger organizations. And I'm going to say to people like Facebook and Google and Amazon and large organizations who generally play fast and loose with the terms and conditions about the use of their platforms, sharing the data. You sign up for Facebook and suddenly you're getting emails and adverts from all over the place. The whole point of GDPR was to try and put a stop to that. The big numbers that we heard about certainly haven't come to fruition. The largest fines thus far, I think it was in December of last year, and it actually re-emphasizes the whole point that GDPR isn't about technology. The largest fine was £275,000. It was in the UK, but it was levied against a pharmacy, and it was levied against a pharmacy that left a large quantity, about 500,000 paper records in unlocked cabinets out the back of its premises. So physical security is as much as a part of 27001 and as much a concern of GDPR as anything else. But if you look at Article 83 of GDPR, it actually gives you 11 things that will be taken into account, or that the ICO will consider before giving any kind of sanction or any kind of enforcement. And then finally, fines. Fines are the final thing. I think that's important to know. But those 11 things, when boiled down to, are what did you do to prevent it? What did you do when it happened? And what you're going to do to stop it from happening again. So that's where we are with the fines at this point in time. But given that we're in a different world right now, given the fact that we're all working remotely, I think the opportunity or the possibility, the probability of a data breach, I think has increased tenfold, if not more, because people are working in remote offices, uncontrolled environments. So we'll see.
Great, thank you very much for that, Gary.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the deep dive on this one, Gary. Really appreciate that for many in the security industry, they know that they should be asking questions about regulation, but they don't often know which ones to prioritize. So really helpful that you've given us a bit of guidance there to assist with that. Are there any final points that you'd like to emphasize to make sure people really get this one right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, I'm going to throw in another number just to confuse things even further, or maybe not. But the BSI, they've recently released a new standard. It's actually an extension to ISO 27001. So if you have that standard, you can then now go for this additional standard. It's actually ISO 27701, and that is particularly focused on personal information management. So that's a PIMS, personal information management system. So that again is close to being able to have, if you had those two certificates on your wall, those kinds of things, they will allow you to really truly get very deep into understanding your gaps around GDPR and security. And the final thing I'm just going to simply say, and it's to reiterate a point I made earlier, that this is more than just a technology problem. Cybersecurity and data protection is all about people. So at this point in time now, if there's one piece of advice I would give everybody, and that is to ramp up your training and security awareness programs. Take this opportunity because the cyber criminals are out there to try and exploit. They look for gaps in systems, gaps in processes, and that's where we are today. So that's what I'll leave it really, which is just to remember that this is a very human situation we're going through. Technology is helping us, and we need to just remember to train our people and to work with them and communicate. And that's it.
Great. Well, thank you very much again for your insights and deep dive on this, Gary. Really appreciate it. Everybody at home, that's Gary Hibbard, who's Director at Cyberfort. So thank you very much for your time today. So before we do leave today's show, it wouldn't be the same without a quick wash up of the news from Kerry. So Kerry, what have we got?
Thanks, Stuart. Yes, so Government Computing News reports that the Trump administration has issued an executive order restricting the use of bulk power system equipment from entities owned by foreign government departments deemed to be a threat to protect its electricity grid from being vulnerable to cyber attack. Info Security magazine features an article on research from the ISACA finding that 59% of cybersecurity teams are equipped to perform their jobs effectively while they're working from home. And finally, Computer Weekly looks at IT priorities for 2020 and its latest study, compliance and risk being the top security concerns.
Great, thank you very much, Kerry. So a couple of interesting points again in the news today. I guess it probably comes as no surprise that compliance and risk is a top security concern. I think one thing that I'll pull out is, we talked about this on the show before about the kind of the readiness of working remotely. So it's interesting that it's difficult for many industries and with cyber teams themselves to fully and truly adopt to this way of working that we all find our ways in. So it underlines the case of making sure that we are continuing to be as agile as we can, but also making sure that best practice is being maintained at home as it would do in the office. Steve, what's your thoughts on today?
Yeah, so I'm interested. I was interested in that government computing news around the Trump administration and the order to restrict the use of certain equipment from foreign countries in the power system. And I guess this is kind of a further development from discussion around 5G networks and those kinds of things. It just makes you wonder how far governments are going to go in terms of restricting the use of foreign technology in, I guess in CNI effectively. And how far they can effectively go with that, given that we rely on kind of trade around the world to implement some of this technology, and how far that could possibly set you back in terms of the development of certain areas if you're relying on pure in-country technology. Be an interesting one to watch, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Also, the issue of CNI, or critical national infrastructure protection, it's hitting the headlines again. We've touched on it in this show many times before, and I'm sure it'll be something that comes up again as well. But getting the right level of defences is right, and making those right judgment calls in terms of the tech, I think is It's absolutely right, and probably a subject that will get revisited time and again before we're through with all of our shows. So we'll watch out for that. Thank you. That really is it for today. Many special thanks to guest today, Gary Hibbard, Director at Cyberfort. Just a quick heads up before we go. Tomorrow we're going to be exploring our Security Begins Here edition, so please tune in for that. Until then, have an excellent rest of the day and see you soon. Goodbye.